Hello, and welcome to Quintessential Comix, the spooky edition. Ooh. It's Halloween. Happy Halloween. So in the spirit of spooky Halloweenness, we specifically chose sort of spooky and paranormal stuff to have in our book club polls, which was particularly hard for new comic book issues because you can't really just be like, I want something spooky. Give me 5 spooky options for October. But thankfully, Shade the Changing Girl, part of DC's Young Animal imprint, came out this month, and our very intelligent and awesome pollers decided that we would read that, as well as Revival Volume 1. And it's going to be great fun. Today, I have some very awesome guests joining me. I've got Elijah.
Hello. I'm a doctor.
And I got Allison.
Hey, sorry that my internet sucks and you guys can't see a video, so you'll just have to look at this weirdly judgmental photo of me all night.
It's kind of a super bummer because you have the best costume, and your camera is not cooperating, or your browser isn't cooperating. Pardon?
I was just asking what her current costume is because I didn't hear what that was.
That's Shade. It's Shade.
Oh, she actually is doing Shade. Wow. Okay then.
Well, so it's this is from last year. It's Rack Shade, not Loma Shade. But yes, that is. It was very convenient that was our theme this week. So I was like, oh, I have it already, but didn't get showed off.
Sorry.
Well, you are.
Thank you.
Do you guys want to start off with Shade, or you want to start off with Revival?
Don't we usually do the graphic novel first?
I think we usually do graphic novel first. Do we? I don't know. Sometimes it switches. Allison, do you remember? I'm great host.
It doesn't matter to me.
Okay, cool.
Do you want if someone has something? Sure. Does someone have something on top of their microphone that might be making a scratchy sound? Is someone taking notes?
Do you hear that?
No. I don't.
Okay. Probably my internet again. Not to worry.
It's just the gremlins chewing on the wire. Nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
It's just the madness in my head. Sorry, it's a Shade thing. Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about Revival first because I feel like we'll end up talking about Shade for a really long time. And we'll, it'll be easier to keep going on if it's at the end. How's that?
Sure.
So, Revival, we read Volume 1. It's an Image Comics comic. I'm going to put up the image on screen just because I don't want to mispronounce their names. But actually, it's not bad. Tim Steele. I did it wrong already. Tim Seeley and Mike Norton. I'm going to put up that so you can see. So this is their first volume, Revival. It's like a rural horror. And there's many volumes of it out, and I think it's still ongoing right now.
Still? Wow.
It's supposed to end this year, though, I think, or next year.
I really, really need to catch up. The last thing I read of it was when they did that crossover with Chew, which was awesome, but really, really weird.
Yeah, I noticed that, and I was like, that is a really weird crossover, because the dead people don't die in Revival, and on Chew, he eats things to figure out their origin.
You haven't read it then?
I haven't read the crossover.
Okay,
I read
trust me, they make it work in a way you are not expecting.
Yeah, I didn't end up getting really into Chew, so I didn't continue or finish it. But yeah, that's not what we are talking about. We're talking about Revival. I actually, when we put up the poll for this book club, I referred to my resident horror friend, Allison, to be like, hey, what kind of comics should we put up in this? And she had some really good ideas, and so those were some of the poll options. Then I was like, oh, also I read Revival recently, and it was cool, and so I put that up too. So
I wanted to read it anyway, so it worked out.
Yeah, so it's always a luck of the draw what comes up. I really liked it. I think it's really engaging. The characters are interesting. The story is set up in such a way that it moves really well, but you're also getting a lot of sense of the characters. The art is expressive. It's not amazing, but it does a really good job in the way that they show the sort of aberrations, the wraiths, I guess. I'm not quite sure what they end up calling them. It's really cool. Overall, I really dug this comic. What did you guys think?
I like it. I like it a lot because I love the idea of just, the whole mass resurrection happening, because that raises all sorts of philosophical questions and stuff like that. And on top of that, they get introduced the mystery of who's this weird spirit entity that keeps floating around. Is it going to harm people? Is it going to be kind of the good guy here? You don't really know. And all the meanwhile, you've got the two sisters, which makes the entire resurrection thing come straight to home really hard and fast.
Yeah,
And great art is very, very much expressive. Also, I don't usually comment on coloring, but I really like how they get a very nice range of skin tones and showing, when someone's blushing. It doesn't look like, oh, I'm blushing like as if see, I'm blushing. No, it's like, no, that character's blushing. It looks natural. It looks like it's actually happening.
I really like how sort of Stephen King it feels, in that you're dropping this paranormal event into a small town with a wide cast of characters and just kind of seeing how they react to it. I liked that this one, it moved along at a good clip so that it didn't feel overly slow, but at the same time, I feel like we're still in the introductory stages of the story. I feel in some ways that it's ended and I've gotten a good story, but there's still, I feel like everything was just kind of set up, which I like. So it definitely made me want to check more of it out. And I agree. Like, I think that there was some, the art is very, it's very clean. It's very accessible and really easy to read. There were a couple things like that. There was a panel near the beginning that was like just a zoom in on Dana's boobs, which I thought was kind of weird.
That was, yeah.
But there are a few actually, like that happens more than once. And I was like, this seems unnecessary in a comic that otherwise is like pretty good about giving people realistic clothing to wear and not, like the suction cup boob thing you see in superhero comics all the time. But yeah, incredibly expressive, really engaging, and the really clear facial expressions, I think, go a long way toward endearing you to the characters and making them engaging. I wish that Dana and Em looked a little bit more different. I know that they're sisters and they dress differently, but if Dana takes her hair down, then they're basically identical, which I found a little confusing more than once. But they're sisters. It's okay. Not a big deal.
Yeah, I get what you mean in the sense of like their clothing is how they look different, and I really like. I'm looking through the comic and I couldn't see sort of those sexualized shots, but I did see some really good horror stuff, and I'm just gonna bring up one of those pages I thought was really well done, because it starts off really as sort of like small town gossip. It's sort of, you get to know these characters and what's going on with these people in this town, and it does have a really nice flow where like, oh, they go into the diner and this guy's here getting coffee and the cops are meeting this other guy, and then it flows into another conversation, but the way that sort of it builds and then effortlessly like just puts it all out there and gets it really creepy is the best. Just the best.
That old lady.
This old lady. So in Revival, spoilers. In Revival, the dead come back to life, and they can't die in this very small town. So this old lady's trying to put her dentures in by pulling out all her teeth. And it's just very, very expressive.
Yeah, there's some super effective body horror throughout, definitely.
Plus, there is the whole noir aspect that goes on top of that. So not only are you just like, you're just waiting to see what happens to the next person who meets an unpleasant end, but you're also wondering what all is going on, because with all these people coming back from the dead, old wounds are being reopened and all sorts of new things are happening. Because, yeah, there are people who are coming back, and not only are they coming back, but they're literally regenerating like as if they're Wolverine. So this is a whole new concept, and very different things happen from very different people based on that. And I don't want to give too explicit an example because I don't want to spoil things.
Yeah, no, and it definitely progresses. I just want to shout out to the comments. Diana McCallum is joining us in the chat. There is a scratching. We'll have to troubleshoot it later. Basically, we want to keep this going. And video games and the
Nelson! Hi, Nelson!
Is one of your friends, Nelson, who understands sort of the same body type, same facial structure issue, where it's like, yeah, cool. You guys can read comments. They are on the screen. They have been acknowledged. Yeah, so I think it's a really good contrast between sort of like the small town gossip of like, oh, you hear about her ex and stuff like that, and then layering over like the rural noir and the body horror and the ghosts and the gore. But also it's so very grounded in these small town characters. I really particularly like the points where it focuses on the officer's son. I can't remember his name, but the son is a really interesting character in the sense of like you can see everything through child eyes. And the way he's seeing what's happening is totally different than like, you know, what the adults are seeing going on. And it definitely changes his world perspective. I'm not sure if it's in this volume because I read a lot of it in issues. But M ends up, because she's like, you know, M is the sister who's dead but isn't. And the boy's in danger, and the sister ends up saving him instead of the cop mom. I don't know if it's in this one.
I'm trying to see. I'm looking. I
Allison, you know?
Well, I feel like we can do mild spoilers. I thought we were always good.
Allison, you're cutting out. Okay, I'm going to give you a second. So it might not be in this volume, but there's definitely, you can see the change in perception of the child, and I feel like a lot of that sort of represents what's happening in the outside world as well, where like at first everyone's like really amazed, and then it becomes more serious when they're sending in all these specialists to have a look at what's going on in this small town where the dead are coming back. Oh, was the mic scratching my zipper? I don't know how to stop that.
That would be my guess, yeah. If you're wearing a mic, it does sound like it's a scratching on a zipper.
Okay, I'm going to just try to wrap this around briefly so it stops moving.
One thing with the character stuff I really liked overall, but I wasn't a huge fan of the dialogue for some of the Asian American characters. Felt a little Mickey Rooney and Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yeah.
But I was glad that despite having such a white town that they did try to include people of color.
Yeah, like the CDC guy.
And I like the reporter lady as well. But some of the like older characters, I was like, ooh. Ooh, rewrite on that dialogue would have been nice.
I don't know, like it's a hard line to walk because stuff that seems like really cliche and like people don't talk like that anymore is how older people in small towns like actually talk. So it might just be that it's like too on the nose, or
well, I don't think it's a small town thing. It's a like specifically white people doing caricatures of Asian Americans speaking thing. Like it just doesn't sound it's a part of the story. So I'm sure it was well intentioned. It wasn't like I have to put down the book now kind of thing, but I did have a couple of like moments with it.
No, it's good, and I mean, no comic is flawless, and this isn't the best comic ever. But yeah, I tried to bring up a scene with those characters, and yeah, these sort of very surface level, especially this reporter. I feel like we could give her more, and I think they do develop her better in the next books.
I'm really interested in seeing where she goes. I think she has kind of a unique relationship to everything, and I like that the ambiguity of her motivation for getting involved. Like she's accused of just wanting attention for it, and I'm curious to see how much of that is true.
Indeed.
For you guys who read, it's just a case of
could you restart? You broke up a lot. Sorry, the audio came in really weird. Hello? Hello?
I'm here. Guess you can't.
Yes, you're back. Just repeat your sentence.
I'm back now? For you guys who've read further than I have, I'm curious about the affair that M is apparently having with her teacher. It was such an odd note to end the trade on, I found.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the only thing in the story that isn't handled really well is M's murder, because it's one of those things they keep saying they're going to get to, but it's not moving as quick as the rest of the story, and because there's these crazy weird creatures, it overshadows the fact that M was murdered and doesn't really know how she died. So, sorry, creatures? Yeah, these creatures. It overshadows the fact that she was murdered and we don't know how she dies. So yeah, there is some more investigation, but I read 20 issues or so, and there wasn't really a conclusion to that arc of how was M murdered. Unless it actually draws into how this event started, I think it's one of those things that's super inconsequential, just because it is so infrequently brought up and it has so little impact on the rest of the story.
Well, that's disappointing to hear. I haven't gotten that much further in, so I'm sorry to hear that. It's kind of cute.
Yeah, that's all. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it would have been more integral too. It might just be that that's how I'm perceiving it, because they make more strides to study the revival victims or survivors. I'm not quite sure. They make more strides in studying them. There's more sort of weird medical stuff going on behind the scenes. That's really interesting. Yeah, they go to investigate different stuff, and then of course there's more murdery incidents, and that's really interesting.
So it kind of turns into a police procedural?
Yeah, and
okay,
it's one of those things I sort of lost interest because they had such a good pace and they were doing so well that it came to a point where it was just it felt like a procedural cop drama instead of a...
They got comfortable.
The horror. Yeah. So I think that's just a problem probably with pacing and just if you start off really solid, it's hard to follow up. And it might also be that they started off not really having a concrete sort of conclusion in mind, and so they're taking sort of time to build up to it because they're trying to figure out how they're going to wrap it all up. But you know, just looking over it today and preparing for the book club, I remember how good this book is and how I should, now that there's more issues out, I should catch up and see how it progresses and maybe, you know, stick around and see how it ends. Because it is good. It's just, I think it had some growing pains because it's one of those things like, this is a really good graphic novel and it's got a really good arc. But the problem with mysteries that don't have a specific time when they end is they have to keep asking questions. It's the problem that Heroes had, where it like kept asking questions and having every time they answer a question, it's not really an answer. It just brings up like 5 more questions. And, you know, as an audience member, you sort of like, you're not satisfied. You get tired of that. But we'll see. I feel like it definitely deserves the second shot. I'm not sure if the people in our chat have caught up completely, but that's cool. It's good. I think it's good. I'm rambling now.
It's good.
Yeah,
it just. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I'm interested at least in catching up or continuing.
Yeah, I'd say Revival is a really great concept, and it's interesting in its execution, but there are notable problems. And yeah, it actually weirdly reminds me of how my roleplay group started out, where we were aiming for a completely different storyline, and by the end of it, it barely resembles where we started. And in hindsight, if it were an actual written project, I would probably have said, okay, we need to go back and relight the first half of that needs to get completely rewritten so that it actually makes sense to get to that end point. So I'm thinking that might have happened to Revival, but they can't do that because it's already published.
Well, I mean, and it could be a case, too, of just us wanting something different from it. I mean, like, I'm speculating because I haven't actually read any further, but it's possible that they just, again, I'm thinking of the Stephen King vibe of it, but it could be that they just, like, that's not what they wanted to do. They wanted to make it character-based, and they wanted to see what the characters would do and how they'd react to everything. So it seems to me possible that while maybe we were hoping that it would be more of a murder mystery, that like they just wanted a story about people reacting to this weird thing. Like I'm thinking even something like In the Flesh, which was a BBC show that had the same concept, and there were sort of like a degree of underlying mystery to it, but for the most part it was just like, okay, these people came back from the dead, what do they do now? And it was just like them going about their lives. So it could be that's just a story these guys want to tell, you know?
Yeah, kind of a Robert Kirkman thing. Walking Dead, Invincible, all that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and there's, I think, like, it was weird. There was, like, I think a year on TV where, like, the BBC and HBO or ABC, like, there was a bunch of, like, come back from the dead TV shows.
Yeah, there was the French series as well.
There was, like,
Netflix
The
had
one. And The Departed? No, that was something else.
The Return was a remake of Les Revenants.
Okay. Allison knows her stuff, guys. That's why she's always on the book club.
What can I say? I like horror.
Resident horror expert.
Yay.
Yeah. You've got many grand titles. It's just one of them. But yeah, overall, I think it was good. The coolest thing, hands down, are the weird, like, ghost thingies. I think that's the coolest part.
Yes.
And that and the characters kept...
Let me try and bring one up real quick. Let me try and find him.
It's great.
I love, the spooky guy, the one white one that reminds me of Daryl from BPRD.
Yeah, here, I'll bring it up.
Daryl?
I'm BPRD. Yeah, he was the one that he would go into. Daryl had his own suit because he was non-conforming.
No, that's Johan. That's
okay.
Johan. Daryl was a Wendigo.
No.
We had a similar kind of vibe where so I actually thought this guy might be as well Wendigo. But yeah, he was white and had elongated limbs and stuff. So he had like blood around his mouth, but he didn't want to hurt people. And this one doesn't seem all that interested in harming anyone. And also, yeah, just like the white thing wandering around in the deep woods kind of vibe. Anyway.
Cool. I think that's all.
Can I add one last thing on
One last thing.
One last thing, I promise. I love the way they also shade the spirits differently than everyone else, because with most of the people, it's kind of traditional comic book shading, but with the ghosts themselves, the spirits, it's singular lines. It actually gives it this whole ethereal cloth-like feel. So it actually does make you think of, the whole, ooh, I'm a ghost, spook cloth, but how it might actually look if it was cloth-like, but an actual spirit. So that was neat.
Yeah, I thought it made it look very, like it was glowing, because it was so, the white was so unrounded and unrendered. Definitely.
I think they do a really good job with the contrast, and also when they do like the highlights of the glow on the other characters in the room, it gives it more of that aura. That's really excellent. So a really good character design on that for sure. Cool. I'm gonna wrap this up, and we're gonna move on to Shade the Changing Girl. Yeah, basically, I'm going to let Allison introduce most of this. I was really disappointed today because I dug through my back issues looking for the issues I got of Shade the Changing Man from the 70s, not 70s, the Vertigo run. Had 70 issues. But I don't have them anymore. It was part of the stuff that eventually just I gave away or lost or like just not there in the moves. Because
that's too bad.
I got
really
them
hard to find now.
Yeah, I wonder if they're at like my parents' house or something, because a lot of that stuff I got when I started working at a comic book shop when I was like 15. I was like, these covers are cool, but it was always random issues, so I could never really get into it because it's a book about madness. And when you start in random issues, it's like, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand what's going on.
I'm going to be honest with you, probably doesn't make a whole lot more sense if you follow along. It was not a very narratively driven comic.
Yeah, I mean, having like your main character like fight madness and also like have hallucinations and delusions like as part of his everyday life gives you a lot of like creative leeway, because you can just be like, and he was crazy, but so I don't know how often they did that, but it seems like a really good
that's not really what it was about, but you didn't read it, so I'll give you a pass.
Watch as Alice incorrectly summarizes comics. But let's talk about the new issue. So this is part of the DC Animals imprint.
DC Young Animal.
Young Animal, pardon me. Which I guess they're doing a bunch of younger characters.
Well, isn't the goal to be renewing about mostly old properties? I think they have one original, but they're sort of delving back into DC Vertigo's Stranger series and rebooting them for the most part. Is that the goal?
Really wouldn't say that it's meant like for younger audiences, because literally in Shade the Changing Girl at one point in a flashback, it really looks like they're heavily implying that everyone's having a hand job orgy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say implied. I'd say that's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I've tried. I've just stopped trying to understand what DC is trying to accomplish with their comics marketing. But
they're doing things. They're throwing balls in the air. Can't you see all these balls?
Well, yeah, I know. I mean, a lot of comics is like throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. My only concern is that I won't be able to enjoy this comic, Shade the Changing Girl, without reading these other comics. Because
they have nothing to do with each other.
Okay, that's
They're not
good.
connected at all.
In the back of the issue, they have a character profile on the Luma shade. And then they also have a character profile on this other guy. And I was like, oh, who's this like Cave Carson dude? And it's for the other comic. So I don't know if that's just like an ad or something. But that gave me the illusion that there might be like crossovers and you have to read the whole thing to understand. Maybe it's just a promo thing. If it's not, then excellent.
Yeah.
It just seems to be cross-marketing.
Yeah, as I understand it, it's more a sort of communal vibe that they're going for. Because they've got Shade and they've got Doom Patrol, which obviously are both very had very significant runs on 90s Vertigo and were associated with like the really weird British invasion stuff. I don't know as much about Cave Carson, as I understand it's an older character. And then they've got a new one that they're introducing called Mother Panic that Jodie Hauser's writing. I don't remember the rest of the creative team on that one. I apologize. But I think it's more that they're trying to, it's like Vertigo was originally, where sometimes, you know, I don't know if they're going to be crossing these ones over at all. Maybe they will a little bit, but I think it's more a sensibility that they're trying to tie together with all the titles. I don't think it's intended to be like a shared universe or anything like that.
Good.
I mean, my understanding, at least.
Good. Okay, cool. Well, sorry, I didn't mean to distract, like, talk about the comic with talk of like production, but when it comes to you want to know up front. I want to know when I'm investing in a series if that means I have to invest in 5 other series. So it's good to know, and it's good for the viewers to know as well. We are going to do spoilers about this first issue, but it's basically an introduction to the character and the story. What did you guys think?
Elijah, I'll let you start.
My response was, okay, so now I know what it's like to do acid. Because at first, I never knew about the Shade stuff. I've been just now starting to delve into Vertigo. I actually got lucky. There's a local store, they had some old Vertigo issues, so I picked those up. And I want to dig through it, but I had no idea what I was jumping into. And then it's like, okay, here's this bird and this squid, and the bird uses the squid to get a magic coat and now there's people who are skeletons, and it looks like the world is melting, and people are having dinner, but the one's turning into a zombie, and the others are skeletons, and there's a neighborhood kid who's trying to make sense of it all, and what am I reading? This is beautiful, but I can't even follow it, and I was able to follow Umbrella Academy.
Alice, what did you think? I'm curious. I want to know what people who are getting dropped into this for the first time, how they feel about it.
Well, I even though like I haven't, like I'm not like a Shade fan, I'm aware of Shade and what Shade is. And I've read sort of like older Vertigo stuff where they definitely blend the line and they do a lot more different sort of storytelling techniques. So I was sort of prepared. And it's one of those things, like, it's very disconcerting when you first read it, like, or when you're first, like, starting to read it. So there's definitely parts where I'm going back through the issue and then rereading certain scenes and panels. But I was able to sort of find the narrative, find the through line. There's a couple pages in particular where there's different colored panel speech boxes. Which I realized first, one of them is Luma, who's embodying the girl. And then the other one, I was like, oh, maybe this is a song, but I wasn't quite sure what that ended up being.
It's a poem.
Yeah, I think that's Rack Shade's writing. Like, it's Luma thinking of Rack Shade's writing, because this is supposed to take place after the original Shade thing. So that is the one thing that it's connected to, is that it is connected to the original Shade comics, but besides that, I don't know what else is going on with that.
Yeah, well, she explains that she was a poetry major and that she was a big fan of his work. She's remembering lines of his poetry. That particular poem is from an old issue of Shade the Changing Man. I looked it up. I think it's issue 22, with this insane art by Brandon McCarthy, where if you thought this was hard to follow, that's much, much worse, much weirder. So yeah, I'd say like Alice, I definitely did go back and reread stuff a little bit, but what attracts me to a lot of the old Vertigo stuff, not just Shade, is that it doesn't hold your hand and that it will give itself space to be weird and be confusing and kind of rely on the reader to follow along. And sometimes that means you do have to read it more than once, but I like that in a comic, and I can understand why it would be off-putting to other people when you're looking for a story or a narrative, and it's like, here's some meditation on the meaning of identity.
Well, it's not that I found it wholly off-putting. It was that, okay, this is happening. This is really, really weird. By the end, I finally started to see the through line, and I'm curious to see them play more in the future issues with her interrelations with the other humans, because Luma jumped into a really troubled girl, so that's going to have its own ball of wax on top of creating an intergalactic incident.
Yeah, so that's one thing, again, that's kind of a through line from the old comics. And so Peter Milligan, when he was writing the old series with Chris Bachalo on art, a lot of it was an examination of identity and sometimes the fluidity of identity and the parts of yourself that you want or don't want the world to see. And there was a lot of issues with Shade trying to figure out how much of, because it was the same kind of thing where he had come over from the planet Meta through the Madness Zone, and he was inhabiting this body and trying to figure out how much of that old personality was still lingering, how much of it was still a part of him. And in that case, it was like a sadistic serial murderer.
Interesting.
So yeah, so it was a lot of, is any of that still me? And common with this guy? Is it something that I would have had in common without sharing a body or a consciousness with him? And it's like really bizarre. And this is like, this is still only like the very beginning of the series. It changed a lot as it goes. It kind of reinvents itself a number of times, and the character is reinvented a number of times in really different personalities and stuff like that. And I got the impression that with this series, there's still an interest in that, especially with Loma being this like much more alien being. Like, she doesn't start out as a human-looking creature, which I think is really interesting. So she's inhabiting such a different body and such a different personality. And she even says something like, my beak feels squished. So I think navigating her own identity, her own relationship to Earth, which she's kind of revered through pop culture, and then like navigating high school and trying to figure out who she is now and if she's going to stay, especially now that she's being hunted by, authorities from Meta, including this was an Easter egg for fans. The old woman you see at the end is Rakshade's ex-fiance.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I don't know. Shade, I don't know that he's dead. The last time I saw him was in the New 52 when he was just like, peace out, Justice League Dark. No more for me. And I don't know what he's been doing since then, but he wasn't dead. So I don't know how his coat ended up in the museum. So like, if we're supposed to understand that means that he is dead. I don't know why. It wasn't originally, the vest and the coat were separate. So I don't know if now they're supposed to be the same thing. So I have some questions too in terms of the mythology, but.
I'm just gonna turn to some comments. Sure. We love this photo of Allison explaining stuff. Diana wants it that way forever. Also, Elijah, you got some buddies in the comments.
I followed it.
Like, hey, thanks for tuning in, guys. You could totally stay after and check out all of my other videos. Allison, there's so much to this character, and I really like it, and I really dig it, and I really like this new introduction. I was really hoping for something similar to this in Justice League Dark. That was one of the titles when it was announced. I was super excited for it. I was like, this is so cool. We're gonna have like a paranormal Justice League. But yeah, the pitch was ultimately way better than the comic. The second volume was decent with Jeff Lemire, but like they put him on it so people would start reading it, and then it started getting readership, and then they took him off. And I'm like, no, he's so good at the writing. So yeah, I'm really excited about this imprint of Shade. A lot of the things you said, I think is really cool. I like that we are introduced to it through Loma on Meta, and bringing in that alien aspect from the get-go, and having sort of like it wasn't very much, but having those establishing scenes of her as like a bird in this different world really establishes her character, and establishes her possession of, what's her name? Megan. So even though it's really confusing, we wouldn't have it any other way. Part of the reason, when I picked this up when I was 14, I was, one of you is giving me an echo. Hold on. No.
It's not me.
Not me.
That's weird. Maybe. Okay, never mind. So yeah, when I originally picked up Shade the Changing Man when I was 14, I was like, this is really weird, I don't understand this. But one of the reasons I picked it up is because Vertigo Comics had never talked down to me. And even if it was something I wasn't even if it was something I didn't understand or I didn't like, I was like, that's cool. I don't need to. Not every comic is for me. And I really, at that time, I really enjoyed Sandman. I really enjoyed Preacher. I enjoyed a bunch of other stuff. And I was like, when I picked up this comic and I didn't understand it, I wasn't like, I want them to make it more simple. It was like, oh, I need to invest in this. This is something you can't just sort of pick up the 33rd issue because it's got a picture of JFK on the front and be like, oh, this is cool. So yeah, that's one of the things that originally drew me to comics in general, is just oh, hey, Vertigo doesn't treat me like I'm an idiot. And I think it does a really good job here of bringing back that feeling of having something really complex, but giving you sort of enough tidbits of information to just get the gist of it, while keeping you sort of off balance and not really quite comprehending the whole picture.
Also, if I could throw in one other thing, the art, the way they handled handling the art, that they did a fantastic job with, especially because at first when we're seeing Meta, it actually comes across a bit more grounded than when we get to Earth, because then the madness is swept in. So even though we're on Earth, like you said, we needed to start at Meta because that's her grounded reality. So once we're on Earth, it's weird. Some panels even bend, and it's fantastic artwork.
I loved the sequence. Yeah, Marley Zarcone and Kelly Fitzpatrick, I believe, are on art. I adored the bits where Loma was drinking the soda and just kind of floating around having a look at everything. I thought that was awesome. In this sort of weird astral projection moment, I thought that was really, really cool.
Indeed.
Yeah, you need such a really strong art team on a book like this, or it's just not going to work. Chris Bachalo was fantastic because his style was so elastic on the 90s run. And I think Zarcone is taking a bit of a different tack, but I think it's working really, really well, especially with the really vibrant colors. And I think that it keeps everything really engaging, even as it's really bizarre and confusing at times. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Sorry, you look like you had something to follow up on that, so I put the camera on you.
Me?
Sorry, but
on Elijah. I put the camera on Elijah because it looked like
it has. The only other thing I could really add is I also really love the color choices with everything, because there's a genuine vibrancy to it. And I know part of that's to do with the actual, the madness coat, but on top of that, it just really everything feels alive and flowing. And there are a lot of ways that the color choices, with all the sorts of neons that they go with, that it could be repulsive or it could actually look disgusting. But instead, it just covers that whole ethereal feel of the madness. And like I said, it takes a very precise balance for that. So really just top marks all around for that.
Yeah.
I'd say... oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alice.
Yeah, no, and I like the difference in the color choices they use in Megan's flashbacks, Megan's memories, and the color choices they use in Meta, and the color choices they use in the new world of Shade the Changing Girl, like they're slightly different color schemes for each of these scenes. And it makes a huge difference sort of in setting that tone, because this comic is jumping back and forth all the time. So having that sort of distinct tonal difference makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. One thing I think was really smart, assuming I'm not interrupting anyone, was I think that the idea of setting this in high school is such a brilliant move too, like to give it a distinct identity from the old stuff, because as they've said, they've brought some elements in from the old characters, but I think that the high school setting is going to be a back, even though, as Elijah said, I don't think it's necessarily a title for young readers or anything like that, but the madness doesn't tend to be just wackiness for wackiness sake. Like there's a degree of that in the Milligan Bachala run, but it's a manifestation of Shade's fears, anxieties, and that kind of thing, or other people's fears and anxieties. And so the madness is in effect just giving tangibility to people's things that they're scared of and things that they don't like about themselves or each other or the world. And I think that that has a lot of potential as a storytelling device among teenagers, especially since they are apparently living such dramatic lives as it is. I think that that has huge potential. And I'm really excited to see what the madness is going to look like when, Megan, in air quotes, gets back to school and sees her old friends. I think we're in for some really interesting study from even those other swimmers and everyone who was introduced in this issue.
Yeah, that'll be fun to play with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna bring up a page of the school, and it's a very I agree with Allison. It's a very interesting choice, but I think it makes it more accessible because you combine this element of madness and just, I guess, you could do anything with that. And often in Shade the Changing Man, they just did because they could. But combining that with this very real, very relatable classic high school drama, I feel like it really grounds that otherworldly part of the comic and will make it more accessible to a larger audience. So I think that's a really good choice. I definitely think it'll be interesting because I really like the fact that Megan wasn't just like an ordinary girl. She was like top dog, mean girl, like bullied her parents type thing. So that'll definitely be interesting because Loma can totally do like crazy stuff with that or take it in a completely other direction. The other thing I wanted to ask Allison is there any pushback from the host? Because in the beginning of this, Megan's essentially brain dead, and they're about to pull the plug on her, and then Loma Shade inhabits her body. Was there any pushback from Rack Shade's host? Were there any parts where like his personality started taking over and he was sort of the main consciousness in that body?
There were problems with that, yeah, as I mentioned, especially with this like serial killer at the beginning. But a lot of the time it was be clear on like how much of, because he was like about to die, he was still conscious. Shade takes over his body just as he's going into the electric chair. And there's a period later in the comics where he gets a body that just has no brain in it. I don't remember the details. He gets like essentially a body he doesn't have to feel bad about taking. And I don't think there was any pushback after that. So with Megan's brain deadness, it's hard to say. I think it's definitely possible, but I also think it would take Loma becoming insecure or afraid, or like I think it would have to be like something would have to wake Megan up, I think, if that makes sense. But I definitely think there's a good possibility.
Sorry.
No, I think there's a possibility of that for sure happening. But yeah, actually, you know what? I'm going to say I think probably that will happen, especially because it seems like Megan was a pretty strong personality. I think it's likely that that she'll come back. But the fact that she's brain dead means it might have taken a while, so we'll see.
Cool. Elijah?
Well, hello, chat.
Oh, sorry. I had the wrong thing on.
It's fine. I'm thinking if there's anything that's going to wake Megan up, I see it being Luma making some choice that Megan would disagree with. Like, because this will be a learning experience for Luma, I'm assuming. Although, how that plays into everything will be a big question. Because even on her character sheet at the very end of the first issue, you see, like, the marital status is complicated. That's the status is it's complicated. So I'm very curious to see how that all is going to play out, because how Luma proceeds is going to define a lot of the landscape whenever Megan pops back in. And is it going to be a Freaky Friday sort of situation, or is there actually going to be an actual battle of wills?
Yeah, I'm thinking I think Battle of Wills is definitely possible, but I'm curious to see how that plays out. Because and again, when if you're comparing the two series, a dude who was condemned to die for murder and a girl who was a jerk to her high school, to the extent we don't know yet, but they're kind of different things, you know? So I feel like it might be a tougher, Loma will be walking more of a line in terms of doing like morally ambiguous things. Like I think that there's more room for her to wrong Megan than there were for Shade to wrong the host body that he took. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to agree with your initial thoughts on this, Allison, that I think it's going to be something on Loma's side, that if we see Megan, it'll be because Loma's struggling to handle the madness or the vest. She's got other stuff going on in her world that is calling her back, and that's the only. I don't think it's going to be that Megan's going to initially sort of like I don't like the decisions you're making and come to consciousness. I think it's got to be on the other side, but I definitely think it's a real possibility, especially with the paradigm they're setting up amongst these high school characters. It's obvious that there is more to that night than anybody is letting on, because the synchronized swimming team, I love how they're synchronized swimmers, are like, we have to coordinate our story. And I'm like, well, clearly something happened if you have to coordinate your story. So it'll be interesting.
Megan is also going to want to get back at the people who tried to murder her, I'm thinking, probably.
I'm not sure if it was flat out murder, but I think none of them would have complained if manslaughter had happened from all.
Yeah, it's like murder by not helping. I think you can still get charged with that, but I don't know. Maybe it's manslaughter. But
murder by laziness.
Yeah, exactly.
Careless endangerment or something.
I don't know. We'll see. But how awesome would the Madness make their synchronized swimming routines?
That
they should use that. And there's a giraffe now. It would be awesome.
That would be the best synchronized swimming show anybody's ever seen. To be quite honest, if they got their hallucinations to synchronize their visualizations of their neuroses to also synchronize.
Yeah. Well, it can be anything. It doesn't even have to be a hallucination. They could literally, if there was another team on, the water could turn into peanut butter. And it would just be peanut butter, you know, stuff like that. I think that would be crazy, and I would love to see it.
Yeah, and also I think that even if there is a sort of a battle of wills between Loma and Megan, I think these characters are a lot alike, and that might be, one of the things that drew Loma to this host in the first place, that sort of anchors them together, is they're both very driven. Loma had to be super driven in order to get this vest, and super obsessed, and eager for power. There's a lot that even from the first issue, they set up their characteristics being very similar. So, you know, it might even be that instead of it being a battle of the wills, that they find they're more similar, and it works if both consciousnesses work together in this same body to become the ultimate badass of madness. So much speculation.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's a good sign that we all got excited enough about the series that we're speculating.
Plus,
calling it, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Elijah, continue.
Plus, with just simply how open-ended with the madness everything becomes. I mean, we were talking about revival and not knowing where it actually was going, how that could potentially be the thing here. With Shade, they could go anywhere with it, and it will make sense still because of just how crazy it could possibly get. So, yeah, it is Speculation City.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to do pretty much whatever they want, which is really exciting. It's one of the things I love about the old series and the old character was just like how many possibilities there are. So you can do whatever you want.
It's like a serious freakazoid, almost.
Yeah, actually, it's a lot like that.
Yeah.